Welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast, where we talk to C-level leaders from across the payments landscape. We'll be discussing the products and services that impact the payment space today, as well as trends and predictions for the future of payments. We will also hear stories from our guests about their journeys to the top.
If you look at trends, right, so you're going to have some spikes in the trends, just like in the stock market. But overall, right, fraud has been consistently increasing. Fraud has never decreased. Like people talk about 2020 and COVID and say fraud has increased. Well, but if you look at the years before, the fraud was up. It was never down, right? There was never a time where we're like, we don't have to worry about fraud. It's so cool that nobody has to worry about it anymore, right? It has never been that case. So fraud has always been on the rise and it will always be on the rise.
That was Adwait Joshi, the chief Seer at DataSeers, and he is our special guest on this episode 184 of the Leaders in Payments podcast, and I'm your host, Greg Myers. Adwait is a very talented musician with a resume that touts 5 different instruments, and his very first job in corporate America was as a toy designer. So how did he end up in payments? Adwait will be the first to tell you that he has a true passion for complex data and what industry utilizes data more than payments. DataSeers helps financial services companies take control of their data assets. There are several use cases, but they predominantly focus on fraud detection and prevention. They position themselves in the marketplace as the solution for taming the data demon, and they analyze all aspects of their customers' data to provide them with prescriptive analytics and a consultative approach to reducing risk. We've got a great episode ahead, so let's get started. Hi, Adwait. Thank you for being here and welcome to the Leaders in Payments podcast.
Thank you, Greg. It's my pleasure.
Well, let's dive right in. Tell the audience a little bit about yourself, maybe where you grew up, where you went to school, where you currently live. We'll dive into your professional career in a minute, but maybe start out with a few of those basics.
Absolutely. So, Greg, I'm originally from India, Mumbai, grew up there. It's funny, I just completed 21 years of my life in this country. And I posted something on LinkedIn about that, of how I came. I basically came to upstate New York and came here to study master's and hopefully, get a PhD, which I never got, ran away when I got a job. The focus was data, right? Anything related to data always excited me. And the goal was to see what can I do as I work in this industry using complex data. So obviously, too much snow in Buffalo, New York, moved to Atlanta in 2005 and been here. Love Atlanta. And obviously, Atlanta is transaction alley. As you know, the majority of transactions are getting processed here in Atlanta because of the large financial services companies that are here. So ended up in financial services space about 11 years ago. A small consulting engagement turned into an 11-year career. Started this company. And again, data has always fascinated me, right? So in this case, the data from a financial services perspective, consumers, spending, behavior, fraud, and all of that kind of brought this company together. And that's what I do. I'm the chief seer here at DataSeers. And what chief seer means is basically CEO and chairman of the board.
Okay. So you loved data so much, you put it in the company name.
Exactly.
All right. Well, let's talk about the company. So tell the audience what DataSeers does.
Absolutely. So, one of our tagline is taming the data demon, right? So if you look at the past 20 years that at least I have been here, and of course, some of the listeners probably have too, around in this industry, data has gotten significant importance over the last 2 decades. In the last 1 decade, we started looking at big data technologies, rapid streaming technologies, and this and that. But the question always was around, how is that data being used? In the past 2 or 3 years, you're actually now starting to see consumers questioning how this data is being used, right? So we have always called the data demon, right? Which means that there's so much data, so much volume, so much velocity, so much variety. And there are people who really don't know what to do with it. There is so many enterprises today that don't know how to use that data. And so the whole concept of taming the data demon, so our goal originally, and that's why we named the company the way we named it, is that the idea was to help financial services companies such as banks and fintechs and anybody who is in the payment space, right, to take control of their data assets. And then once you control that data asset, it's a tremendous power that you wield that can go into any different verticals, right? You have fraud as a vertical where you need massive amounts of data to then do AI and ML to stop and fight fraud. You have compliance, where you can do a lot of compliance stuff like consumer compliance, which is complaints, disputes monitoring, anti-money laundering stuff, and so on and so forth. And there is many verticals that go down like that, where data is the massive single most important piece for you to achieve what you're trying to do. And so that's what the company focuses on. So we are kind of a middle office, back office solution, right? So anything that happens not at the retail location of a fintech or a bank or a financial services company, the things that get done over at the headquarters, right? Things that keep people awake because they're not super excited about what's going on. That's what we do with that data. But at first, like the name says, DataSeers, the idea is seeing through the data. And so getting a vision through your data. So that's what the company does.
Okay. And you mentioned those kind of areas that you focus on: financial services, payments companies, fintechs. Are there certain size companies that you focus on more so than others?
That's a great question, right? So we do. And the reason why we do is because if you're too early, then people generally don't focus on these type of issues, right? They're just trying to get their business up and running. And then if you're too large, and when I say too large, I mean like the large institutions like JP Morgan Chase and Bank of America and those guys, they already have initiatives in-house where they may not be able to use our entire system. They could certainly use parts of it, but not the entire system. So we have seen that we typically don't go to the top tier banks, right? Tier one banks, and typically don't go to somebody who is super small. So we play a lot in the payment space. So BaaS banks, banking as a service companies, fintechs, payments, all of that is kind of our expertise. So on one side, we have chopped off the ultra mammoths, and on the other side, we have chopped off the people that are just getting started.
Okay. And then are you just in the US or North America? Where do you do business today?
We actually have international customers, right? So if you look at how our office is set up, we are headquartered here in Alpharetta, which is a suburb of Atlanta, a little bit north. And it is where majority of the tech companies are also focused. And then we have an office over in Mumbai, where a lot of our offshore development happens. So we have clients from all over the world, certainly US being the biggest market for us because of regulation, right? We have tremendous regulation in this space. And wherever there is regulations and examiners are involved, there is opportunity to actually create software that can automate some of these processes.
Okay. And is your business model sort of SaaS based?
Correct. So we classify as a B2B SaaS.
Okay. And then when you go to market, do you go to market through a direct sales team? Do you have partnership? How do you go to market?
Yeah. So, I have worked in this industry for a while. So I have a large network of people. So we have direct sales on staff. We do partnerships. We always tell our customers that don't look at us as a vendor, because the moment you look at us as a vendor, you start cutting relationships because, if I'm just a vendor, then somebody else is going to do the job cheaper. Somebody else may be doing it better for more price. Who knows, right? So there's all sorts of permutation combinations that come into play. But if you look at us as a partner, then we can actually achieve what you want to achieve through this relationship, right? So those have turned into a lot of referrals for us. So we have a lot of repeat business through that, right? So person A meets us at this institution, then gets a job somewhere else. They like us, they bring us along, and so on and so forth. So we have a partnerships person on staff who's focused on partnerships. We have direct sales, and then of course, a lot of referrals.
Okay. Maybe walk us through a typical use case. So maybe pick a fintech or a payments company. Why would they come to you, and sort of what does that use case typically look like?
Sure. So, we have developed a end-to-end solution, right? So typically what would happen is, a fintech might have, and again, a fintech's use case is different than a bank's, but let's focus on a fintech use case. So, you have a marketing budget, amazing folks, doing marketing like Bobby, who does marketing for us, has ideas, go and try to acquire customers. And all the money is being spent on acquiring customers. But that's actually also creating a massive opportunity for fraudsters to say, ooh, these guys are getting ready for a massive launch and a lot of people are going to open up accounts. I'm going to go there. I'm going to get through. I'm going to do what I want to do and I'm going to get out before they catch me, right? Very typical scenario. And what happens is people do things with one vendor, they will onboard them, then they're trying to do something with another vendor and the data is getting thrown back and forth from all of these different systems. They don't talk to each other. They can't drive intelligence. And, a year down the line, 18 months, 2 years down the line, you're stuck there with massive fraud, right? Somebody gets fired, people get changed the jobs and so on and so forth. And we find ourselves right in the thick of it, saying somebody's coming to us and saying, hey, this is what happened. We don't want to look at what happened, but we want to make this better. Because if company goes through that phase, right? Initially, it's about get customers, get customers, get customers. Then it's about, reduce fraud, reduce fraud, reduce fraud. Then it's about make money, make money, make money. So most people, our unique value prop is we can help those folks right from the get-go. Because I always say this, right? If you guard your gates, you don't have to chase those criminals around, right? If you don't let them in through the front door, you don't have to waste time chasing them around. So it all starts with having good policies, good border control, right? For not letting the bad actor in and then not having to worry about fraudsters or any kind of financial crime. So that's kind of our story where we tell people is that this is how we can help you. And then what happens is we have tremendous amount of solutions, right? So let's say you're trying to onboard a customer in Bulgaria, you're trying to onboard a customer in India, you're trying to onboard a customer in UK, or you're trying to onboard a Brit in the US, right? So there could be any permutation and combinations. While a lot of companies are restricted in what they can and cannot do in different geographies, we are not. We are a truly international platform that helps you literally onboard anywhere in the world, business or consumer, do all of these checks, be compliant with the laws, and start working, right? And let the system do its job and keep the fraud out.
Okay. What would you say differentiates your company from your competitors?
Experience and knowledge, right? So in today's day and age, it's very easy for anybody to say, okay, I'm a fraud AI company, and there will be somebody that writes a $50 million check, $100 million check to, get investment. That's easy. What we have done is we have organically grown, right? We have grown our company organically. We're about 100 employees now, close to 100 employees now. And we have done it organically. Now, that's a testament to our success and our product, that experience and just the ability to do things that people generally don't know has helped us get this far, because we only built what was necessary. We didn't have to pivot. What was our MVP became our product, today, and the roadmap. And it's all driven by a customer need. So we haven't developed anything that nobody wants. So we don't have to do R&D, walk 3 steps forward, 2 steps backward, 3 steps in a different direction, 2 steps backward, because, we have a mess of an organization, right? Whereas a lot of people, when they start, they get money, they pivot, they do this, they do that. They're trying to figure out, where am I going to make money? What is it that's going to help me profitability wise? Whereas we built and we said, okay, we know the industry, we understand where the problems are, and we are just going to solve that. We're not going to chase anything else. We're not going to go to the next shiniest object. We're going to focus on this, solve the problem, and move on, and let the customers do the rest. And so that's how we look at the industry and what we have, and its experience, right? The years of experience in this space, understanding of the industry, how data flows, understanding the data assets, understanding how fraud happens, money laundering happens, how reconciliation happens, how analytics happens, consumer behavior, all of that is put together in this application.
Yeah, I want to circle back and talk about the solution again for a second. You gave the use case of fraud and the data, so very valuable use case. What we often hear about in the payments industry is you have all this data, but what are the insights that you get out of the data? What's actionable? What can you do? So do you end up doing consulting around that, or take the fraud example off and let's talk about maybe reconciliation or back office, and there's all this data. How do you coach or teach your customers what to do with all that data?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. And there's 2 parts to it, right? One is the prescriptive analytics that is coming out of our software, which basically tells you, hey, John's committing fraud or Jane is doing this, right? So that's more prescriptive, which means there's a cause, there is an action. Okay, you do A, I'm going to close your account. You do B, I'm going to do this, right? So that's part A, which comes out of our AI and ML. And part B is more consultative, where it goes around so somebody asks me, how do I reduce my risk? Well, there is not a clear ABC. It's part science and part is art, right? You got to figure out how are these things going to work. So that's where our consultative approach comes in.
Okay, makes perfect sense. So where do you see, whether you want to answer this from a data perspective or a payments industry perspective, but where do you see all this space going, say, in the next 2 to 3 years?
That's a great question, right? So it's interesting that we have seen the funding has slowed down a little bit and the economy is starting to move around a little bit, right? So we had a meeting with the Federal Reserve here in Atlanta a couple of months ago, and they said that they're predicting a downturn economy, right? Or an economic downturn, whether that is recession or not, is a different day. But they said that we are going to increase rates 6 times, which is going to curb some purchases on the housing market and so on and so forth. And we think that we will be in this rut until 2024. That was a prediction that I think the Federal Reserve had made. And we are seeing that, right? We are clearly seeing that we are heading in that direction. Now, it's not going to be as long as 2008 is what people are saying. So where I see the industry going is we will see a lot of fintechs honestly disappear. And it has started happening. At least 4 or 5 have come on my LinkedIn where they have closed doors and shut down because they couldn't make money. There's going to be a lot of consolidation, right? Bank consolidations are already happening. We are seeing that banks are buying other banks and kind of, grouping together. I think there was a metric that Gartner had put together, if I'm not wrong, that in the next 10 or 15 years, there will be like less than 50% of the banks around, right, of what there are today. Again, don't quote me on it. There was a metric to that effect, right? You can go Google it, I'm sure. And so with that consolidation, with the disappearance of some fintechs because of purely lack of funding and lack of need, what we are going to end up seeing is there is going to be a lot of M&A activity. The banks have not taken technology forward in many cases, right? So like if you go and ask, hey, who is your favorite bank and who has the best app? You'll not get one answer, right? People will be like, well, nobody has a good app, right? Nobody has an app that I can download that I love. And that seems such a basic thing to do, right? Such a basic thing to do. Today's day and age, you can write a amazing application for $10,000, right? Amazing application. And yet it's some basic things that we as a society struggle with. And that's where the fintechs have been successful. Because if you think about it, what has happened is the fintechs have basically said, okay, I'm going to create an amazing app. I'm going to create an amazing UI. It's going to be customer facing, customer centric. It's going to be all about the customer. And then on the back end, they're still using the same banks who cannot put a good app together, right? So it's going to be interesting to see whether they start cannibalizing each other, right? Where the bank says, wait, I can get this customer and I can do something different. Now, most of these banks are also looking for non-interest income, right? That's been the biggest focus is how do we get non-interest income, which is why so many people are entering the payment space. They're doing stuff inside the payments market and trying to figure out how they can get to the next step. And so I see a lot of consolidation. I see the winners will prevail, right? They will be successful. And what that means is somebody that can give the customer what they want and not buy a small, like, okay, well, I just do A, I just do B, right? Provide a complete experience from a financial services space. And payments are getting faster. We all know that, right? We are able to literally pay whoever, wherever, whenever, however. Today, we don't even have to think about it, right? There's going to be 1 of 10 ways you can pay them and it's going to work. Like you don't have to worry about it. So that's going to be focused internationally as well. That's a big focus today. If you see a lot of people are doing remittance and, the networks have gotten into that space and so on and so forth. So that's, I think, and then one of the things that always makes me curious, and I don't have an opinion one way or the other, is what's going to happen with the crypto industry, right? I mean, there was a guy at a dinner the other day, and people asked him a question about, what do you think of, crypto? And he's like, well, you can't wear Bitcoin around you and walk. I can wear gold, right? So yeah, people compare it to gold, but yet I can actually wear a gold. I can go to a pawn shop, exchange it for money. But, Bitcoin, there will be some people that are like, well, I don't even know what that is. So it's an interesting thought, right? It's an interesting perception. So I kind of sit on the fence when it comes to crypto. I always have, which means I look at it as a gold rush. And in the gold rush, the people who made the tools, right, made the money. The people who sold the shovels and the picks are the ones who made the money, not the people who were, running or trying to get the gold. So we have a tool that can support crypto, fiat, any type of payment. So we sit in a very sweet spot. So if it succeeds, great. We are going to be here. If it doesn't succeed and regulation gets strong, great. We are here. We can actually provide you what you need. Yeah. So long answer, but that's where I predict.
No, I was going to ask follow up about crypto. So I'm glad you went ahead and brought it up because it comes up in my conversations, right? I'm talking to CEOs and it's interesting how their answers have changed over the last, I would say, 12 months. 12 months ago, it was, hey, it's an asset you can invest in. And then slowly it became, well, it's going to become a payment method. And now no one's really talking about it unless I ask. So, and everyone's like you. They're sort of on the fence. They're like, hey, we're ready for it. We think it might come, but now it's slowed down. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to ask. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, one of the trends we've seen, I think, with COVID and so many things going online, the amount of fraud has increased. Do you see that continuing, or do you think that was a blip because of just the mass rush of everything going online? I mean, what's kind of your opinion there?
Yeah. So if you look at trends, right, so you're going to have some spikes in the trends, just like in the stock market. But overall, right, fraud has been consistently increasing. Fraud has never decreased. Like people talk about 2020 and COVID and say fraud has increased. Well, but if you look at the years before, the fraud was up. It was never down, right? There was never a time where we're like, we don't have to worry about fraud. It's so cool that nobody has to worry about it anymore, right? It has never been that case. So fraud has always been on the rise and it will always be on the rise, right? The challenge is you can never solve it. You can get close, but you can never solve it. And why is that? So if you look at the companies who are spending time creating algorithms and creating all of these solutions, and some people think that AI and ML is this magic thing that you wave a wand and fraud disappears. Well, it doesn't work like that, right? You have to train your models. You have to make your models work for you. The machine actually does exactly what you tell it to do. The machine doesn't really start doing things, not in this industry. There are other industries where that applies. And so what ends up happening is the amount of time these fraudsters actually spend to penetrate through and go in and do some stuff is so much more. And the technology that they have and the ideas that they have are so much more that it's just that they have been for years outsmarting the non-fraudsters or the people who are trying to combat financial crime. So I don't think that, the spike may have gone down a little bit. That's debatable, right? After COVID, certainly, we had a lot of loss on the payments of PPP and stimulus checks and so on and so forth. But that compared to the amount of money that moved, right? So if you do an average of how much money moved and how much was a fraud, you'll actually see that the percentage has been going up significantly. So the reason why 2020 and 2021 was so spiked high and everybody's talking about it is because massive amounts of money moved, right? Massive amounts of money moved in a very short amount of time. Now that doesn't happen so quickly in typical circumstances, right? So if you look at a typical circumstance like today, right, we are not sending out that kind of stimulus checks or PPP loans that we did back in the day. So now we have a little bit more control, right? And now we have a better way to handle those things. But if you look at the ratio of for every dollar that was moved, how much was fraud, you'll see that that metric is constantly going up in many ways. Because what is happening is this fintech industry is opening up new ways, new ideas, new doors to these fraudsters to come in and do things and move money around and launder money and so on and so forth. So it's an age-old problem, right? How long has money laundering been going on? I mean, we have Netflix shows on money laundering, if you think about it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it literally talks about systematically laundering the money. So it's obviously been around. We know about Panama Papers and we know about all of these things. It's still happening under our eyes in daylight, right? So the challenge is that how do you solve it, right? A part of it, you can't solve it all, right? You can curb it. And that curb, you have to always stay on the edge. You can never relax. So a good friend of mine, who is a CISO, global CIO at LexisNexis, Dr. Flavio Villanostra, he always says, right, when you talk about fraud, the fraudster only has to be right once. You have to be right every single time. And that math just doesn't add up, right? That's like saying, somebody's shooting bullets at a wall. I just have to get one through. That's it, right? Everything else can get blocked. I just have to get one through. But the guy that is building the wall has to say, I have to block every single bullet, no matter where it comes from.
Right. Very good analogy. Well, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about you. So let's talk about your journey and how you became the chief seer there. Maybe pick up and tell us about, you moved here, you went to Buffalo, and you started your career soon thereafter. So maybe walk us through how you got from there to starting the company.
So, like I said, I was always excited about data. So my very first job out of school was Fisher-Price, right? Designing toys. And I saw that there was so much data involved in that. Like, how do you design a toy? How do you come out? What do you do? And so I started automating some of those stuff. Shortly thereafter, got recruited by Intel to go do some internship with them over in Portland, Oregon. and started doing that. And then, super excited about what was happening. And then I kind of got a job here in Atlanta, came here, spent a few years in the footwear industry. So, the insoles that you wear, the Dr. Scholl's machines that you might have seen in Walmart. So we were doing all of that super early inside the podiatrists, offices and inside athletes' foot, amongst other places, like analyzing the data for people's feet and how they walk. Then kind of went into animal health a little bit, right? So worked for a large animal health pharmaceutical company tracking flea and tick behavior in the southeastern United States to see like what weather patterns give rise to flea and tick. And the idea was that, if a season is going to be very strong, which is, if the winter is hot and humid and it doesn't freeze off, then you have more fleas in the springtime. Then the doctors could actually use that data point to tell their customers that, hey, Fluffy is going to need flea and tick prevention this upcoming spring, because a lot of people don't put their pets on regular flea and tick products. And then obviously came into the financial services. I was called in as an expert to help somebody for a couple of weeks. That 2 weeks ended up being 6 years. Worked with a lot of customers in this space, made a lot of friends, and I found my passion there, right? So I'm a professional musician, which is one of the things that some people don't know about Indian classical music, right? I learned that before I even learned how to read and write. I was initiated into music as a very young kid, and I started playing instruments. I play 5 instruments, I sing. And so that is all about data. If you look at Indian classical music, it's all about beats and cycles and the math that goes in it. So math has been the most important thing for me. Financial services has given me that math. And I always say this, right? So when the data doesn't fit X, Y, and Z axes, I want to get involved. And people say, what do you mean by that? And so I say that in the financial services space, you add a time dimension. So the moment you add the time dimension, the complete data analytics changes. The complete way of looking at data perception completely changes, because time can mess with you. Right? The time can also mess with that data. So you can no longer do X, Y, and Z thing. Now you're in a completely different dimension of time, along with all the data that you're looking at. And so those kind of things have super excited me, and which is what made me form this company, is let's actually take those data elements and put them on a time series and start looking at behaviors and looking at things that you cannot put on a X, Y, Z axis, and analyze them over a period of time to drive value, growth, and these kinds of opportunities in the financial services space.
Okay. And you sort of already answered part of the next question, but it's a two-part question is, what are you passionate about personally, which I think you just answered, but if you want to go into more detail, you can. And then what are you passionate about professionally?
Absolutely. So I'm a musician. So personally, music is my absolute passion. If I didn't have to do anything else, I would be doing my music. That's how much I love it. And I'm super passionate about that. And then professionally, I'm an engineer. So I like to build things, whether it is physical things, whether it is software. I see myself as I can never stop building. I always love to build things, products, and so on and so forth. So I'm very passionate about that professionally. So those two things kind of keep me pretty busy, as you may imagine.
Yeah, I bet. When I started in payments going back, I don't know, it's been 16, 17 years ago. I don't even think the word fintech existed. And, I sort of fell into the industry and haven't gotten out of it. But today, kids graduating from college, they look at our industry or the fintech space and they say, hey, I want to build a career there. It's a great space. It's fast moving. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of money being invested in it. What advice would you give someone coming into the fintech or payments area or space? What would you tell them they need to do to be successful?
That's a great question. And I will definitely put in a plug for my friend Tommy Marshall, who runs Georgia FinTech Academy. I actually have a board meeting at the Georgia FinTech Academy this evening, right? So what Georgia has done is they have created this, the education system in Georgia, like the Georgia Techs of the world, the UGAs and the Georgia State and so on and so forth. They came together and they basically said that we, Atlanta and Georgia, have identified that we have a lot of payments opportunities here, a lot of fintech opportunities. So we are now going to start putting together curriculum that sits side by side with the colleges, because you couldn't learn about fintech in school, right? You graduated with whatever MIS degree, computer science, computer engineering, whatever that is, and then went and got a job somewhere and then learned on the job. So now they have created the opportunity to learn about fintech. And why is that useful? There was a survey done, I forget who it was. It may have been Spotify or they put a program in place where they said that, okay, you have your recent graduates, young kids, and then you have your super senior people who are the C-level executives, and they're missing a middle management. There is no middle management at all, right? So people are not graduating to the next step of their career. So they created a university program internally within the companies who would then train these, guys that just come in and say within 2 to 3 years, you're going to become managers, but we are going to train you. They actually hired people to teach, put together a curriculum and so on and so forth. So that piece is missing today, right? Like middle management. Fintech is so new that you have the bankers and you have the people who have been in this industry like you and me, Greg, for years. And then you have the kid that's just entering the industry, right? Has no experience. There is not a lot of in between. So that's why you see all these fintechs are run by 20 something years old. And when you say a banker, you don't think a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old kid, you think like an older person. But if you look at what is missing from this equation is that middle management. So the advice that I'll give these people is, while it's great to enter this industry, it's fun, it's amazing, it's a lot of opportunities to learn, stick around because this industry will give you the maximum progress than any other industry. You could be in the medical industry for 20 years and you will grow at the same pace that you have been growing. But you come to fintech, and if you stick in it, in 10 years, you're going to grow like 30 years worth because the wealth of knowledge you will have because you stuck and you did these things is going to be greater than anything else that you ever do. So again, I'm completely biased because I love financial services. Absolutely love it. But that's my suggestion to these young kids that go into this industry, look for opportunities, and then stick to it at least for 5 to 10 years. It's going to be hard. It's going to take time. But in 5 years, growing 20 years is amazing.
Yeah. That's interesting. It's a very interesting perspective and not one that I have gotten from other people, but I think you're absolutely right when I think about it. So I think that's great advice because you're right. Majority of fintechs are being started by younger and there's definitely a gap there. So I think that's great advice. Well, we've covered a lot of ground about you and your company and the future of the industry. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
No, I think this has been a great conversation. Thank you for having me on this, and it's been my pleasure. So, no, I think it's great.
Okay. And what would be the best way for people to find out more about the company?
So we are on the internet, dataseers.ai. We are on Twitter, which is DataSeers, and LinkedIn, and we are recruiting for a lot of positions. I mean, there is massive amounts of roles open with us, both here in the US and India. So if there is somebody looking for a job, and we will train you. So if you're fresh from college, if you want an H-1B visa, we don't care. We give everybody equal opportunity to come here and learn and be a part of it, because the way we look at it is we're creating the next gen talent for fintech.
Awesome. Well, Adwait, thank you so much for being on the show today. I know your time is very valuable, so I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
And to all you listeners out there, I thank you for your time as well. And until the next story.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Leaders in Payments podcast. Make sure you visit our website at leadersinpayments.com, where you can subscribe to the show and where you'll find our show notes. If you enjoyed listening, please share on your social channels as well.